I just talked to the Tennessee soybean board, and this is critical. Their estimate is that over the next 2 to 3 years, 50% of the soybean farmers may go out of business.
Today I'm sitting down with Scott Porter, the founder and CEO of Dynamic Green Products. Scott and his team are building out a portfolio of bio-based industrial lubricants to take on industry giants such as WD-40.
Our products are designed around tree care, landscaping, and ag equipment. And that's really key. So you're not just getting a green product, you're not getting a check mark in the box of sustainability. You're getting something that works as good or better.
Most of us don't think about industrial lubricants in our everyday lives, but the reality is it's literally the grease that makes industry go.
Plant material starts off cleaner, safer, and because it has that oxygen molecule attached, it solubilizes additives very, very well.
Scott has a compelling background and explains to us why plants can outperform petroleum, how he works with some of the world's biggest brands that trust his product, and lastly, his vision for changing how the industrial lubricant industry works here in America by supporting American farmers. I hope you enjoy the conversation, and remember to go direct. Hey, my friends, Jordan here. Just a few words before we hop into today's episode. First and foremost, a sincere thank you and appreciation for all of our early listeners, readers, and supporters at Going Direct. It's really what keeps me going to do this each and every week because there's clearly a community of folks out there looking to build a Going Direct economy, which gets me super excited. Secondly, if you haven't subscribed, please do so. Our main channel and community is forming over on Substack. The link is in the show notes below. And we'll also be putting out our weekly conversations at YouTube, Spotify, and Apple Podcasts. I hope you all have a great day. And remember to go direct. Okay, we are live. How are we doing today, Scott?
Good. How are you?
I'm good, man. Well, listen, I've been excited to do this one for a little while. I know we've been talking about it, but it's not every day that you get to talk to the lube man. We're gonna go deep. We're gonna go deep into industrial lubricants today. Just to kind of frame it up for everyone listening and watching, as you kind of all know, kind of the heart of this going direct economy that we're all looking to build is really centered around decentralized production and this whole idea of how do we reorient our systems of production from kind of big, dirty, centralized ones to more decentralized, clean ones. And obviously we're at the very front end of this with kind of what we're seeing geopolitically and most countries in the West looking to reindustrialize for many reasons, most importantly for their own sovereignty. And so one of the things that I've always found fascinating is there's one area where a lot of people just don't even think about when you think about the real economy and industrialization and making things, and that's how to literally grease the wheels. So, and for full disclosure, I am a advisor and early investor in DGP. So just for folks to know that. So Scott and I know each other very well. So Scott, I want to start here. From your perspective, what's fundamentally wrong or broken with kind of how we make industrial lubricants today?
I don't know if it's fundamentally wrong, but it's an old habit that doesn't seem to die, meaning most all the lubricants, about 99% of them, are formed from petroleum. And in most cases, a lot of these lubricants are getting out into the environment. So they're not clean processes to start with. So from a manufacturing side, they're not clean. But typically they're getting out in the environment, they're getting on operator's skin, they're all petroleum, they've got contaminants. Virtually all of them have a Prop 65 chemical warning. So it's just old school, it hasn't changed. And it's a forgotten industry from the consumer side. As we talk about renewables, getting away from fossil fuels, what people don't realize is that doesn't mean that you get away from lubricants. And so lubricants is one of these things that continues to grow because even as you electrify, you still need gear oils, you still need greases, you still need lubricants for the machines and equipment that are running the next generation beyond fossil fuels.
Great. And can you just break it down a little bit for the layman, because most people that listening probably don't know much about industrial lubricants, but you, which we'll get into, but you make everything ranging from all bio-based, but ranging from like an equivalent of a multi-use oil of a WD-40 to grease to bar and chain oil that goes on chainsaws. So can you just kind of explain a little bit about, there's all these different applications for lubricants, and kind of, if there's just a couple different buckets, or how like the whole industry is organized would be helpful.
Yeah, I mean, the number one lubricant that everybody is familiar with is automotive engine oil. And so, as we electrify between Tesla and every OEM that's getting rid of an ICE vehicle, internal combustion engine, you're getting rid of the automotive engine oil, which is about half of the market for lubricants anywhere around North America. And so when you take the bottom half of that, it's everything that's not automotive. So think of anything that moves, anything that lifts, anything that turns, anything that needs, torque. I had a conversation yesterday with somebody that's one of the world's largest solar inverter and gearbox manufacturers. So as you think of solar, people don't think of lubricants, but every one of those solar systems has a gearbox oil and a grease. So when we're talking about industrial lubricants, it's virtually everything that's non-automotive. So it's a massive swath of equipment, machines, industries, you name it, but it continues to grow and get bigger. And again, it's dominated by petroleum.
And so let's talk a little bit more specifically. I want to jump into what DGP actually does. So kind of just give us kind of the quick kind of overview, and then we'll dive into a few different pieces of it.
In a nutshell, we are a bio-based lubricant manufacturer. We have no petroleum-based oils. So petroleum segmented for the most part into 4 different group categories, basically good, better, good, better, best type strategy. And so we are using not only plant material, but we are also using the most advanced chemistries within plant material. So every product we design and bring to market is a replacement. It's a drop-in replacement, 100% compatibility. And that's really key. So you're not just getting a green product. You're not getting a check mark in the box of sustainability. You're getting something that works as good or better. Obviously, it's safer. Yes, it's sustainable because you can regrow it. But that whole concept is you must not have any compromise, because if people have a bad experience on a lubricant once, they will never come back. It's not candy. It's not gummies. It's, yes, it's a commodity, but a very important commodity that's critical to driving manufacturing success, operational success. So yeah, everything we have is plant material. Again, designed to be drop in, work better. So you literally buy, pour, use, and repeat. Very simple.
And so can you tell people a little bit kind of where you started, kind of the beachhead product, and then kind of is a little bit more about the broader platform of products?
Sure. We started in arboriculture, specifically tree care, because all the businesses in tree care have chainsaws. Chainsaws are 100% total loss application. They all require bar and chain oil. And so it doesn't matter whether it's an old school plug-in electrical saw, a gas-powered saw, a new battery saw, they all require bar oil. So when you put that oil into the reservoir, every second that saw is in operation, oil is being flung out into the environment. So that kind of watershed moment for me was like, wait a second, everybody with a chainsaw is literally, doing direct pollution. And there's nothing within our government law or mandates that say this isn't right. So if you were to take a can of oil and go outside and dump it in the street, you violated the Clean Water Act, the Federal Clean Water Act. Now, if you take that same can and put it into 3 saws and cut 3 or 4 trees in the exact same area, the same amount of oil flings out, right, out of that can, but it just came from a saw. It's perfectly legal. So that to me just didn't make sense. And so that was our beachhead product, was our bar and chain oil designed for chainsaws, mainly for forestry and arboriculture.
Great. And then just a little bit more about what other products you've recently added and will be adding, just so people get to understand the breadth.
Sure. So if you think of that market, forestry, arboriculture, cutting trees, and within that, you've got a lot of equipment. You've got wood chippers, you've got hoists, you've got bucket trucks, you've got all types of machines, equipment that need greases. So we have the world's first biosynthetic HPM certified grease. That's a high performance multi-use grease. You mentioned WD-40. We have respectfully a replacement for WD-40. We have a 2-cycle engine oil. We have a 4-cycle engine oil, specifically 5-weight 30, 10-weight 30, 0-weight 20. We've got an air tool oil, hydraulic oil, and a few others that we're working on. But it's really, our products are designed around tree care, landscaping, and ag equipment.
Great. Super helpful. All right. So I want to dig into this because this has been kind of one of my gripes over the last several years, because I've spent a lot of time in the biomanufacturing space and speaking to folks that actually make bio-based products, in kind of it's kind of come out of vogue a little bit for whatever reason, but kind of everyone at some point was talking about, the doing things that are good for people and doing things that are good for human and planetary health, essentially. And so kind of the last wave of climate tech. And what I found with most companies that were kind of claiming this, it wasn't kind of core truly to what they were doing and what they were building. And one of the things that really stood out, Scott, the first time that we met, was kind of, you have the whole kind of performance, people, planet as your kind of 3 Ps that represent the pillars of the brand. And one of the things that stood out for me was you lead with performance. And I think it's a really important point, because I mean, most of the bio-based products in this kind of the last wave of biomanufacturing, unfortunately, they learned the hard way, where it's like, if you don't outcompete the incumbent product in the market, whatever you're competing with, like there's no, and even on cost, there's no way you can do it. So I want to just walk very kind of briefly through the 3 pillars, because I think it's really important. It's like it's ingrained in your DNA and what DGP does. So let's start with performance. Why, on the performance side, which is what you lead with, why can plants outperform petroleum? Because most people will not believe that.
Generally speaking, the plant material has higher thermal capacity than petroleum. So if you look at petroleum just as a base oil, think of lemonade. Okay, there's thousands of different brands of lemonade. Compositionally, they're all identical. They have water, lemon juice, and sugar. Yet, why do they all taste different? Okay, now let's start with the water. The water is the base oil. It is the carrier of the additive system for lemonade. What's the additive system of lemonade? It's the lemon juice and the sugar. Now, if you start with the base oil, it's the quality of water. Now, imagine if you have a lemonade that just started with tap water versus getting water out of the lake versus reverse osmosis versus deionized water. Very different quality of water. It's still water, but that impacts the overall quality of the finished lemonade, the taste, etc. And the same with your additive system. So petroleum, most of the base oil, petroleum base oils in the lubricants, they're not fully saturated. They're full of contaminants, waxes, sulfurs, etc. And they don't perform well in high heat. So from a molecule standpoint, structurally, they're not clean. They're unsaturated. They break really easy under temperature. And then also, just like lemonade, you have to solubilize the ingredients. They have to mix together, right? You don't have a layer of water, a layer of sugar, a layer of lemon juice. They're homogeneous. And so a lot of times petroleum does not solubilize well too. And so you have to really come up with these schemes where I'm either a very low cost, low performance product because my base oil is low cost, therefore I'm not putting in high end additives. I'm putting low cost additives. And the better the base oil, the better the additives. Plant material starts off cleaner, safer, and because it has that oxygen molecule attached, it solubilizes additives very, very well. And so you get higher thermal capacity. You get what we call a higher viscosity index. That means under heat, the viscosity changes less. Typically, that's measured from 40C to 100C. And then there are other benefits. So it has some intrinsic value that's way better than petroleum. Now, with that said, there's also a little bit of downside that you have to counteract. But generally speaking, you're starting off cleaner with a base oil that has higher thermal capacity. And lubrication is all about reducing friction. That's the whole point of it. You're protecting the metal structures and reducing friction. Friction is essentially heat. And so when you reduce heat, you're increasing efficiencies. When you reduce wear, that piece of equipment lasts longer. It works better, lasts longer. And that's where you get your total value. So if you go buy a new truck and you spend $80,000 on your dream truck, and let's just say, for instance, it didn't come with wheels. Now, are you going to go put the lowest cost retread tires on that $80,000 truck to save a few bucks? Of course not. That doesn't make any sense, right? And so you want to start off with quality to make sure your investment lasts as long as possible. And plant material gives you that solid base, that higher quality, higher purity, and allows you to do many things that petroleum can't do from a chemical formulation standpoint.
In just a question, you started off by saying the base oils with petroleum are typically not there's other byproducts, other things in it, they're not as clean or pure. Why is that? Is that because actually from a production standpoint, they're using kind of the byproduct of the petroleum to utilize for these lubricants?
Yeah, if you think of a barrel of crude, the vast majority of that is going into fuel,
Sure.
right? So that's going into a process to create fuel. The actual lubrication, the lubricant side of it, the re-refined portion that comes out of it is a byproduct. So it's already low grade, low cost. It's a byproduct of the fuel industry. And so depending on how you want to service that material and what you're trying to create, you're already starting with a contaminated low grade byproduct of the fuel industry.
Great. All right, let's move over to the second P, which is people. And so let's I think there's kind of multiple elements here, but I think the first and foremost is the operators and the health of the operators. So just talk, obviously bio-based is healthier, but I want you to kind of drill down into that. And it's something I think that is overlooked and people don't think about much, that I think is really important when you have folks that are doing this hard work their entire careers, and it has a huge impact on their health over time.
When I'm out visiting customers, very rarely, almost never, I think I've seen it once or twice out of hundreds of visits around the country, nobody's wearing a respirator. Okay. So nobody is really focused in when they're operating equipment that are using lubricants, especially total loss lubricants, they're not wearing respirators. And so how we think about bio-based from the people standpoint is, are you breathing in something that's safer? If you get something on your skin, is it safer? If you have incidental ingestion, is it safer? So don't ever want to tell anybody that it's 100% inert and totally non-toxic. You can take, gallon and chug it during the football game. You can't. You're going to get a tummy ache and there are repercussions. But generally speaking, because the material is cleaner and you are able to break it down, it's not a pure hydrocarbon, it's considerably safer. And so we don't compromise performance. So in some case, there are some additives, there are some things in there, but when you look at a parts per million, and so you look at parts per million, carcinogens, contaminated material, the overall molecule structure, which is typically a hydrocarbon versus ours that has oxygen, it's always safer. And so if you could reduce what you're getting in terms of toxic chemicals by 50%, 80%, in some cases 99%. What does that mean over time? It's an accumulation. I don't like to use the word cancer, but cancer for the most part is an accumulation of bad things that we've either ingested, breathed in, gotten our skin over time. And so if we can reduce that by a significant percentage, 30%, 50%, 90%, it's going to have a positive effect down the road. So again, biomaterial from a people standpoint universally is safer from those three aspects.
All right, then obviously the planet side.
Yeah, that's the easiest one. So everything we do also gets certified as biodegradable. And so you can ask 100 people what the word biodegradable means, but there's actually international standards on what biodegradable means. So we always test to OECD 301B. So that's the gold standard globally for how do you determine biodegradation claims in a lubricant. So we always get our products certified to ultimate and or readily biodegradable. So that means when it gets out in the environment, yes, the microorganisms can break it down over time. And of course, it's sustainable. Why? Because we can regrow the material every year.
Great. And then kind of one other thing I wanted to ask you about that I think is important for the audience to kind of understand. We're going to hop into the three going direct pillars as it relates to DGP is the relationship with Stanley. And, I know DGP has a very unique relationship with Stanley and their family of brands where you are the exclusive formulator of bio-based lubricants. And so can you just kind of talk a little bit about that? And I think just that in and of itself speaks to the performance side because the world's largest brands trust you and DGP and what you do. So can you just talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, just a quick backstory too is when we were looking for partners, we reached out to a lot of companies, a lot of big brands that you know. And Stanley was the first one that not only said, yes, we're interested. There were others that said, yes, we're interested, but they took kind of a head first approach. And so they looked at this purely from an engineering perspective. And then once they validated from an engineering perspective that there was no loss, there was no compromise, you could drop it in, you could actually get the same or better performance, then it became, can we make this a viable business strategy? So if you think about that, the world's largest tool company said, we can make this a business strategy. And what I'm really proud of with this relationship with Stanley that I think is still unique, a lot of companies talk about sustainability and use it as a check mark. They use it as a marketing ploy. They go buy a solar panel, they go buy a generator, and they claim they're sustainable. They actually bring us projects regularly. Like how can we change this? How can we approve it? How can we make this bio? So it hasn't been, hey, let's just have a subset of products that we can call sustainable, so we can add that to our corporate impact report. No, they're actually doing it. I mean, we are shipping products around the world on their behalf that they're going to potentially use internally that a customer might not even see. And so from a business standpoint, that's one of the proudest moments of my life is that you've got the world's largest tool company that's not just saying one thing and doing another, right? Behind closed doors. They're doing it. Like they really legitimately want better, safer products. And, cost is always an impediment because most companies are used to low cost, just get it in there, do the Me Too average bare minimum, right? And slap a label on it and move on, right? It's not a core competency. It's not a core piece of business. As I mentioned earlier, lubricants are mandatory for most machines and equipment in order to operate. But their mission is actually to proliferate, sustainability, be a leader in the space. And again, not just say one thing and do another and, great, we're sustainable. We have a couple of products. So moving forward, all the DeWalt lubricants and all the DeWalt products are bio-based. When it comes to fluids, that's not tools. It's not their core business, just for listeners, right? Is so the chemicals and the fluids that are associated that have a go with strategy, right, are all bio-based. And we're working on other brands with them. We're working with some of their partners. We developed a product for them specifically to replace a petroleum product within their factory that they need for manufacturing that was causing issues because of the VOCs levels, the volatile organic compounds. And so again, these are things that most companies don't think about, but they're trying to remove petroleum and move to bio, but do it in a manner that doesn't impact quality or the customer experience when they get their tool or equipment.
Great. And we're going to come back to the pricing point later on. But so it's interesting. This is a fun one for me because I want to kind of apply what DGP is doing in the context of kind of the three pillars of going direct. And I think Scott, you and I have spoken a lot about these different pieces, but just to frame it up for the audience, I mean, essentially what really intrigued me when I first met Scott was kind of your mission of saying, I really want to work to change industry and actually to make bio-based lubricants the norm and really change the way that how people procure this kind of category of product. And so it was very interesting for me because we're talking about generally a commoditized product, as you mentioned, something that most people don't put a high level of consideration into. It's like, if that product works, if my machine works, like it's good for me. And so that's a real challenge. So you basically have and are facing choke points across the entire supply chain and distribution. And so I want to kind of break down each going direct pillar, and we can talk about it in the context of DGP, because I think a lot of stuff that you're working on strategically is figuring out how to get beyond these choke points. And for someone who, is really trying to change an industry with a bio-based alternative, I think there's a lot to learn from not only the struggles, but also some of the strategies you're using for folks across different industries that are dealing with similar dynamics that really exist in many of the other aspects of our real and physical economy. So just to kind of reframe for everyone, the three pillars of going direct is you have decentralized production at the core, then you have changing the wholesale distribution function, and then lastly is kind of the direct marketing function. And so kind of the idea is if you can put all three of those together over time, you can start to vertically integrate, capture more margin, and have complete control and connection with your own customers without someone standing in the middle. So let's start on the production side. So can you just explain a little bit? You don't have a manufacturing plant yet, but kind of how the products are made today.
Sure. Generally speaking, for all total loss lubricants, we're using soybean oil. And so one of the things that's part of our mission statement, within our mission statement, is that we're using as much biomaterial from American farmers. And in this particular case, if you think again, let's just focus in on chainsaws. No other industry, one application chainsaws, because it's the easiest one to understand. 100% of our base oil comes from American soybean farmers. So we've partnered up with soybean agencies and partnered up with processing plants. And the biggest processing plant today that we pull from is a co-op processing plant where farmers are involved in. So just like any industry, they're usually always controlled by a few big companies. And, there's upsides and downsides to that. And so what we're trying to do is pull from smaller processing plants that involve the farmers. Because ultimately, right, we want the farmers to earn a good living. We want the farmers to not have to rely on government subsidies and third-party entities outside of our country. So first and foremost, the base oil starts there. American soybean farmers, and how can we have the greatest impact, which is pulling from co-op processing plants that are giving back at the highest rates. Unfortunately, soybean oil or any seed oil is a commodity that's traded over CBOT, right? And so every day it has a fluctuating price, and it becomes very difficult. If you think of as a farmer, right, you've got a 8 to 9 month window to grow something. And a lot of it relies on Mother Nature that you can't control. So you can have the most sophisticated equipment on planet Earth, but it comes down to Mother Nature. You have a very finite window of growing and harvesting. And all that must come in alignment. Meanwhile, there's people around the world that are valuing your crop, by the hundredth of a penny. So for us, again, it's really important to say is how can we drive as much of our resource into the farm, back to the farmer? That's through co-op processing. So secondly, we are focused in on all USA manufacturing. If you look at our supply chain, 99% of our supply chain starts here in the US. So even when it comes to our bottles, our caps, our labels, we're looking at small to medium-sized businesses. In many cases, they're family-owned businesses. Again, we're trying to centralize our manufacturing in one area, but utilizing a continental supply chain of small businesses, family-owned, from the farmer to the label manufacturer to the cap manufacturer, et cetera. So it's a very important pillar for us too as a company as we're developing our products.
Okay, and then so I have to push you on one thing because I think it's important. You made this comment 99%. So what is not coming from the U.S. just for transparency purposes?
Yeah, sure. There's a chemistry that was developed in Europe. It's owned by a German company, And so it's a very unique biochemistry. We cannot get it here in the US, and it happens to do really good things. So we source that chemistry from a US distributor, but ultimately that chemistry does come from Germany.
Okay. And when you say chemistry, are you're is it you're buying an actual base, or
It's a chemical.
is
Yeah,
a
it's a
chemical?
chemical
Okay,
additive.
okay. Okay,
Yeah, it's a
chemical
chemical
additive.
additive that has a very unique patented process,
Cool.
chemical structure to it. But yeah, but that's from a German
Okay.
company.
Okay, great. So just to summarize, just so folks follow it. So one of the things I love the most, which people don't really connect to, I know you're working on telling the story about this though, is kind of all of the base stock and the base oils made primarily, and most of the products now are made primarily with American soy, so directly supporting American farmers. And then you're putting together all the different components for your supply chain, and then that goes to kind of a contract manufacturer that specializes in industrial lubricants. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, great. All right, so let's move over to wholesale distribution.
Yeah, fun. My favorite topic.
So, you know, if folks don't have experience in these kind of in general industrial industries, they're largely dominated by distributors for a variety of reasons. They offer their customers amazing amounts of diversity of product. They centralize billing, they centralize invoicing. And so a lot of times you kind of have monopsonistic, meaning there's very limited buyers if you want any type of volume for the supplier. So that's can be really challenging. And so can you just talk a little bit, Scott, about your experience thus far, kind of having to, working through the traditional wholesale distribution kind of model as a smaller kind of supplier?
Sure, sure. As we mentioned about the initial product, right? It has a long history of, of habitual tendencies. And so when it comes to distribution, for instance, and we'll say this is a hypothetical scenario, you have a large distributor distributing lubricants, and their anchor brand may or may not be a Shell lubricant, right? Shell is Pennzoil, very good brand. We see that Jiffy Lube, we see it all over the place. They have their fingers and everything. And said distributor may not want to carry a competitive lubricant that counteracts what that anchor brand is doing. So, you have this whole network of regional and national distributors that a lot of times will have an anchor brand, and that anchor brand has a program. It has very strict rules. And I don't want to say it's impossible. It's incredibly difficult to break into that. And if you do break into it, it's even harder to get the attention, the mind time, an ability to sell the products, promote the products, because as you said, you now become a line card where a person is walking into a customer and they see the Anchor logo, they see all the great Anchor stuff, and then you have all these little tiny brands here, and then one might be bio, and you're handing them a line card and go, which one do you want? When 90% of that line card is an Anchor brand and it's got 500 different flavors, it becomes very difficult. So lubricant distribution, is no different than food distribution, no different than any high volume industrial distributor. You've got to break into old habits, and you've got to figure out, how do you compete against anchor brands that are worth, billions of dollars and have 80 years of entrenchment, not only at the end user, but in the infrastructure around it. You mentioned distributors are great, right? Is like they do a lot of things. And so our market still requires these processes. So distributors have been instrumental. But when all of that stuff is just literally cemented, it's so hard to break. And so now you have to think outside of the box. I don't want to keep trying to go in there and break the cement foundation, right? Is like, how do I create myself to be an anchor and be accretive to that foundation and stand up? So if you think of a skyscraper is, don't try and get in there and be an office, try and be the 71st floor, right, on that anchor. And that's what we're trying to do. And that's how we look at it.
Yeah, well, it's interesting, and just I think to frame up the folks just so they're clear. So, kind of, the core users of the product are more professional users, so people that work with the equipment on a daily basis. You obviously have larger industrial companies, which would be your traditional B2B. Then you have kind of B to SMB, and then obviously consumers can also purchase the product. And so, the next point that I wanted to hit on, which you predominantly with your first product sell through Amazon and Home Depot. So you kind of have both online retail through the 1,000 pound gorilla,
Yeah.
and then obviously kind of more traditional retail. And so obviously going through both of those channels, and like I said, everyone takes their margin along the way. They provide a lot of value for you to be able to get notoriety and distribution. But once again, I want to kind of come back to the challenges, and then we'll talk about what you're doing to try to kind of invent your own game. But like, what are the realistic challenges as someone, as an emerging supplier, even working with a big box retailer or someone like Amazon? We don't have to go into like exact details, but just things that folks should be thinking of when how they're approaching their distribution.
Yeah. So first of all, let's make sure that there's a clear delineation between Amazon and any big box retailer. Okay. So even though they are servicing the end user in a similar format, meaning the end user can very quickly get onesie twosies, find what they want. I mean, obviously Amazon's e-com, direct delivery, but at the end of the day, you're looking for a lot of different products. You want to be able to grab one quick. So either off the shelf or online, from your phone. Let's start with Amazon. Amazon is a beautiful mechanism for control and starting out your business. Why? Because they let virtually any business get going. You don't have to go through planogram reviews. You don't have to go through costing analysis. You don't have to do any comparison things, especially when you're doing FBA fulfilled by Amazon. You literally set up your virtual store, your couple of products, hundreds of products, and you can get going with Amazon in less than a day. It's that easy. So you can start, taking a product from, concept and bringing it from your manufacturing entity and putting it right into a virtual store and start marketing to customers and build out your sales channel. So that's where Amazon is beautiful. The downside to Amazon is you're going to start out small and you're less than that $10 million threshold. You're not getting people support, right? You're talking to software, you're working with software, and software is not perfect. And sometimes it becomes difficult. And Amazon has dozens and dozens of fees. And so although the ecosystem is great from the standpoint, there are tons of dials and switches. And I mean, you can do so many things. You're reporting, it becomes overly complicated. And when something goes wrong, it is difficult to fix. And in some cases, whether by design or not, you end up just saying, I don't want to spend any more time on it. And so when you look at returns, when you look at damages, when you look at information that's not correct, you can't pick up the phone and talk to a human being. Everything is software, everything is tickets. Most of the time, it doesn't get fixed and you have to eat it. So there's this, give and get scenario with Amazon that you have to understand is like they can also knock you on pricing. So for instance, one of our retailers was promoting the product 1 penny lower than Amazon's price, $9.99 versus $9.98. Amazon docked us. Amazon slowed down our sales. They even said, we got an email. It says, hey, you're no longer competitive. So this is software that's out there, combing the internet, looking for pricing, and says your $9.99 Amazon price, which is our price, not Amazon's, is no longer competitive, and therefore you can't win the buy box. And it's like, what? Wait a second. How does that work? So you have to understand these nuances with Amazon yes, it's easy. Yes, it's convenient to get started. But if you really want to scale, it now becomes a game of you really have to look at your costs. You have to look at what you're doing outside of Amazon because that will impact your success. And unless you've got something that stands out into the industry, For instance, we're a lubricant. There's lots of lubricants. And yes, we're bio, but how do you stand out on Amazon? It becomes a pay to play. They will tell you is if you want more people to find your product, you have to spend on advertising. And you will quickly find that you'll spend $10, $50, $100, and every time you can see proportional racketing up on your advertising spend versus who sees it. So again, it's algorithm control, and it becomes, this pay to play environment where spend more, you get more people views, but your ratio, your ROAS, like stays exactly the same as you spend more. It's interesting. So there's a lot of upside, and there's also a lot of gotchas with Amazon that are frustrating. Now, retail, the benefit of retail is you typically don't have to do marketing because it's in the shelf. And if it's in the shelf, people already know your product. Retailers do not take risks. Think of them as a bank. They want all the money, they want all the interest, they want zero risk. And so they're bringing in products that are known entities. Retailers, and this is my opinion, but clearly from our experiences, they look at their rent per square foot on the shelf. So unlike Amazon, they have a finite amount of space in the store. And so if you're in a category that's got 7 products, there's 7 products there. If they're going to bring yours in, they have to kick somebody out. So you've already started that risk analysis. And so what they're determining is if we bring your product in, kick somebody out, are we going to get higher monthly returns on that product? So it becomes a game of returns, risk analysis, significant planning. You don't just call up a buyer and say, hey, can I get on the shelf? I saw that you have an opening in aisle 5. It doesn't work that way. In some cases, it's, a year and a half, 2 years, depends on the plan, the line review, the planograms, what's going on with, their stores, either locally or across the country. So it becomes a very difficult game of positioning, timing, margins, risk analysis. So very, very different. And also, you're not just shipping in one case to start. So Amazon, from a financial risk standpoint of your business, you can invest a couple $100 to get Amazon started. On the retail, if a retailer has 2,000 stores and they want to do a promo to start with you of 3, 4, 500 stores, you're looking at an investment of 20, 50, 100 grand, depending, of course, what the sale price of your product is. But it's a significant investment on inventory, because you also want to make sure not only do you have your first push in of inventory, you want to have at least double that. So as the product sells, you can service it right away because they have a weekly scorecard. They will score you on everything, which is no big deal, but they will dock you on everything. You will get charges upon charges. If you don't have a packing slip, they'll charge you $100. So a piece of paper that costs you 50 cents, if you don't have a packing slip and it's not right, $100 charge, even if your product is only $5. So again, it becomes a whole different game of investment, time, risk, and you really need both to figure out which one is the best avenue and make a decision as a business. But it's difficult. It's not easy, and that's why you don't see everybody's product on the shelf at a store.
Sure. And can you just talk a little bit about, obviously it depends what type of product, how heavy it is, the value of the product, like that affects margin profile a fair amount, in traditional retail and Amazon. But how have you found overall margin profile from traditional retail versus Amazon? Like all said and done, is it more or less equal once you kind of take into account all the fees and the advertising and everything that you need to do on Amazon versus going through the traditional retail channel?
Yeah, again, because they're structurally so different on the back end, and Amazon, you can imagine, because it's a lot of onesie twosie, smaller cases. You're not shipping truckloads. In most cases, when you're getting started, you're not shipping in truckloads of product. So you don't have that economics of scale from a packaging and logistics standpoint. So for instance, Amazon, if you're less than $15 and your margin's only 50%, Amazon's going to take roughly 65, 70% of that leftover margin. Now, if you had that same product, but your selling point was $30, $40, and your margins were 50, 60 points, you start getting more back from Amazon.
Sure.
So Amazon is really dependent on size, weight, because everything's being shipped. And so it can be a phenomenal tool if you've got a really small product, low rate, and high margin. So a product like us that's $10, think about it. A customer is buying a product on Amazon for $10. It gets delivered to your door, right? It's like they did that and they only took $6. Well, that's 60% of the total margin of that product. It may cost us $3 to make. So we get left with $1. So it becomes very challenging. But in retail, because you are shipping bulk out of the gate, and because stores are each getting a case or more, your margins not necessarily can be healthier, but they're certainly more stable. So your margin profile is consistent for longer. And it really does not matter the size of the product. So for instance, if you just said, hey, I need a 35, 40% margin as a company to survive, you can maintain that margin very easily on retailer, regardless of the shape, size, weight of the product. In Amazon, that becomes very difficult and more of a challenge because it's all predicated on shipping.
Got it. All right. So let's talk a little bit about pricing, and then we're going to get into like kind of the direct marketing and inventing your own game, the fun stuff. So obviously, creating this bio-based alternative, high performance bio-based alternative domestically is more expensive than your traditional kind of mass market industrial lubricant. So talk to us a little bit about, being able to provide this product at a price point that's sustainable, not only for DGP, but also that the market will bear or people are okay with.
Again, it's there's no one margin profile that answers that question. So it's really dependent on the product.
Mm-hmm.
In some cases, we can be within 20%. In some cases, we're double or triple. So let me give you an example: hydraulic fluid. That's something that you're typically not. We sell in bulk. We sell it in drums. You're not going to see that on the retail shelf. But let's say an equipment operator that's running a D12 dozer, and let's say it holds 100 gallons of hydraulic fluid. They're going to buy that in drums. They're going to buy that in totes. You can go buy the cheapest hydraulic fluid, the lowest grade, cheapest hydraulic fluid for $15 a gallon, maybe even $12 a gallon. But anyways, right there in the low teens. Ours will be in the $50 to $60 range. And so you go, wow. In that scenario, that's 3x, maybe 4x a normal price. But here's the kicker is ours will last 3 to 4 times longer. And so you can't put that on a label. So that becomes very difficult selling point. And that's why those products are not in retail. Now, if you go back to the retail scenario, like a multi-use, if you think of multi-use, right, you look at WD-40, WD-40 is the biggest brand, the most prolific, right? They're everywhere. There's nowhere that they're not. You can walk into a store and see 3 different placements. They'll typically be $4 to $8 a can, depending on the size. We may start at $8 and go up to $12. So, in that scenario, we're 20 to 50% more, but we're a couple dollars more versus hydraulic fluid, we're thousands of dollars more. So there's disproportionate based off of size, margin, the type of product, but generally speaking, the biomaterial, just general economics, right, is that it's harder to produce because you have to grow it. Petroleum, we're pulling crude millions and millions of gallons out from the earth every day. And so it's going into a massive infrastructure. And so that's why crude is the feedstock of the world. And I'm not an anti-crude person. We actually need crude for our civilization to continue. If we stop pulling out crude out of the earth, and we stop for 10 days around the world, our civilization collapses. It is kind of scary. So we do need it, but biomaterial always starts out more expensive. So that's our number one disadvantage from a cost standpoint, because it is cleaner, it's a longer life cycle, and it's not that there's less available, but because the market is smaller, you don't have the same economics as crude.
Yeah, well, it's interesting. I think it's a good kind of a good area to just talk a little bit about, because when I think about if you want to induce from a government, from a societal standpoint, induce more products and more bio-based alternatives, similar to what DGP is doing, you, especially in the early days, you need some support to be able to do that. And so one of the things that I just think is so great because of your relationship with, and you're buying feedstock from American farmers, is I know DGP's gotten a fair amount of support and financial support to help with working capital and a variety of things from a variety of soybean councils. When I see that, I think it's so great because I think that is just it's an appropriate way to utilize resources to help kind of jumpstart a market that can actually, as the DGP builds its brand and builds its distribution, it can actually turn into a meaningful revenue stream for farmers over time.
For sure. If you think about just soybean oil in this country, there's somewhere between 3 and 4 billion gallons of soybean oil produced. Vast majority is going into the food industry. Nothing wrong with that. But the food industry has a very different value. So in terms of that seed oil, it's not only commoditized, but it is driven to the lowest price floor possible because it's a base stock of food. And so when you bring that base oil into industrial, we can increase that price floor for farmers. And so we have over 1 billion gallons available for industrial lubricants. And so there's no reason, there's no chemical reason that total loss lubricants and other products can't use clean American grown soybean oil. The number one impediment to that isn't availability, it's cost. And so most manufacturers go from a base oil that's crude originated, let's say is 30 cents a pound, to a clean food grade American grown base oil that's 50 cents a pound. Now, it doesn't sound like a lot, but when you start getting into the entire product, the entire supply chain, it's very impactful. And a lot of these big companies, they survive, their margin is predicated off of pennies. And so when you're talking about 20 cents a pound, right, that's $1.40 a gallon, $1.50 a gallon. Those are big numbers to big companies. To a small company like us, we can pass that on because we're building a premium product. And I think people understand that a premium product requires a premium price, and they know where it's going, right? But in these other value chains and other markets and other industries, consumers don't see that. There's such a detachment. They don't understand what is in there, and they don't understand how that impacts downstream to where it originates, the farmer. And you can Google story after story today and see that farmers are struggling. As a matter of fact, I just talked to the Tennessee Soybean Board, and this is critical. Their estimate is that over the next 2 to 3 years, 50% of the soybean farmers may go out of business because the market is so out of whack, and we DGP can't save them. Okay, we can't move the needle, but if we are showing an industry that, hey, you can do this, and you're not compromising. Yes, your end price is going to go up. But for bar oil, think of just a chainsaw, just bar oil. There's 30, 40 million gallons of oil that we could switch to soybeans like that. 3 seconds. Done. You're not sacrificing anything. You're actually getting a better product. But that industry alone could shift. And if we could take another 3, 4 industries like that, or product categories, and shift, now that moves the needle. So I look at DGP as we're not the end all be all. We're not solving it, but if we're being a good steward and a leader and winning, hopefully competitors look at this and go, yeah, we're not going to double down on an old strategy. We can go this direction. They've proven that it works. Now DGP is a rising tide that lifts all boats. And now that's how we change the industry. And that's the way I look at it is I welcome competition. Don't come too hard, too fast, but I welcome competition because ultimately downstream, the benefit is going to be the farmer. And that's what we need to think about. It's super important. Without farmers, we don't have food. Human beings, we need 3 things to survive. We need food, we need water, and we need oxygen, right? And so without farmers, there's no food.
Well, you're getting at the core of this of going direct, right? Which is kind of, it's inevitable that this whole kind of, we have to reconnect production with consumption, which I think which is what you're getting at, which is like, how do you get the direct connection back to the people that make our products and where they're made. And I think what you were just saying, Scott, is just a perfect example where it's not going to be just private sector that's just going to do this. It can be the catalyst, but then you need industrial policy and government and different folks who are all just basically saying, we are making a commitment to build domestic supply chains, to reindustrialize, to support our farmers. And I think once all of those things combine with the American spirit and the culture, the entrepreneurial spirit and the culture around work, and when we say we're going to do something and everyone puts their minds to it, we go really, really fast. That to me is what's exciting. So the last thing I want to cover here for a couple minutes, and then we can do a quick rapid fire to wrap up. I think all of these things we just talked about is, you have pressures on you every which direction. You're building in more of a commodity. You're building more of a category that's commoditized products. You're going up against very well-known household brands with a fair amount of brand equity. Some of them are your customers, which is great. You have challenging margin profiles at the early stages. Now, looking at all that, a lot of times all of those restrictions is what creates that innovative spirit and like figuring out a better way. And so I want you just to talk a little bit about, and there's going to be a lot of news coming out later this year with what DGP is doing around content, working with a variety of creators, but specifically around this concept of changing the way that the professional or prosumer purchases lubricants. So can you talk a little bit about your vision and what you're building towards around kind of membership and recurring purchases and what's missing from the industry today? And that's how you're going to build your brand directly with your customers, essentially.
Yeah. We talked about Amazon, we talked about retail. Those are components to getting started. But, as you and I have discussed, I believe the model is a dynamic e-com experience. And so today, if we just focus in on lubricants and a professional operator, most of the time what happens, this is perfect scenario, I've seen this thousands of times, and this is what goes on in the industry is you've got a job coming up and you get to the truck and you're looking over your gear and it's like, whoops, I don't have oil. Hey, can you go run to the store and grab some oil? And so a lot of time oil, because it's a commodity and because even though it's critical, it's one of these things that's not planned from a purchasing standpoint. And you talked about subscriptions and memberships, and the last product that anybody ever thinks about is oil and lubricants, to where that makes sense, because nobody's challenged that model. And so I fully believe that if you had an experience for an operator where they were notified about their oil consumption via their phone, is like, hey, you're getting low on oil. Hey, you ran 8 hours yesterday. You've got 2 days left before you need oil. Click buy, boom, notification goes to DGP. You're already in the system. That oil goes out. We have 1 to 2 day delivery. So we're building our backbone with partners, our 3PL and other partners, to where we can reach 98% of the country in 1 to 2 days. And so my fundamental belief is we are going to help, I wouldn't want to say retrain, we were going to help educate people that you can save money, save time by working with DGP and just doing some pre-planning. And then once we have some pre-planning, we will have the software and back-end intelligence to be able to predict and be able to work with you automatically. It's just like, boom, 5 gallons showed up yesterday. It's like, oh, I was getting low, right? It's like, that's where we want to get to, is that oil shows up. You didn't have to think about it, and it was perfect timing. And therefore, you don't have to interrupt your daily schedule. Again, some corporate planning is involved in oil purchases and commodities, but for the most part, if you're a national or a large regional organization, your operators typically are autonomous when they're buying fuels and lubricants and other low-end commodities to do the job. Right. So corporate is buying the equipment. They're spending the money on the trucks, the saws, the chippers, etc., the lawnmowers. But If you just need to go out and buy some gloves, some safety goggles, some lubricants, some fuels, they don't tell you which gas station. They don't tell you go use Exxon, 91 premium fuel. They don't. They leave all those decisions up to you. And so that creates inconsistency, and it devalues process oriented organizations. And so what we want to do is bring in process, simplicity, and consistency. So you're always getting what you want when you need it. And we believe that's the future, especially for lubricants. I think that's the future for a lot of products, but for
Sure.
us, nobody's doing that. And that's what we're bringing to the market.
No, and I agree with that. I would say one of the things, the area that is compelling is because at the end of the day, consumers and both consumers and businesses, they kind of see through the fluff, right? And they want to know that this is real. And I think how you've set the foundation up for DGP and why I'm a believer is it's very true. This whole performance, people, planet kind of, a lot of times, like I said, that could be marketing jargon, but it really represents who you are and what you're doing. And so I think, even if other companies were going to try and go after this kind of subscription, simplistic, dynamic e-commerce experience in this category, when you think about winning market share, they don't have these other elements that you have, and specifically for the operators, it comes down to their health, right? So when you think about selfish reasons for purchasing, the first thing more than anything, it's better for their health, and they're working with this stuff every day. So I don't know. I think that I wanted just to mention this, that it's not as easy as, okay, I'm going to create a subscription model and disrupt this whatever way that this industry works. I think there's a lot of layers to what you've built, Scott, and for folks out there that are still with us, it's important to understand that it goes much deeper than just like, a fancy e-commerce experience or elegant e-commerce experience.
One of the things that I'm the most proudest is the friendships that I've built around the country. Not only guys like you, but farmers, professional operators, business owners, right? Is going out there is I don't sit behind a desk and do reports and emails and these kinds of things all day. Like, I'm out there. I want to hear the feedback. I want to see it. I want to make sure that we're building the ecosystem that benefits the operator. Every business must generate a profit, or you're not a business, right? You're technically a nonprofit, but you must make profit. But a lot of the big companies, they set profit goals and they set very hard lines that can't be crossed. So for instance, a company may say, well, we can't do that because we need 35 points of margin. We can't do that, or you will not do that until you can figure out how to get 35 points of margin. We look at the business very differently. Yes, we need to make a profit. Yes, we need to survive. But at the same time, is we're not going to do something because we didn't hit a profit goal. So if somebody says, hey, we've got an opportunity to help out, the winter storms and help out this group, and I look at it and go, well, you know what? If we do that, that's going to take out 5 points of our margin for this month. We're not going to do it. You know what? I got the phone call. Send it. We'll figure it out. And so we've been getting phone calls, and these storms is like, hey, we need help. We need help. Can you do this? Can you do that? Answer is yes, absolutely. So, we're not a nonprofit. We have to make money, but our goals within the Performance, People, and Planet is also get the job done, do it right, and treat everybody like you're their neighbor, you're their friend, you're a family member. In most cases, you like your family. But so we're doing things where mission is first, profit is secondary. And I think that's very important for people to know is, we lose that as we get bigger, as we get more successful. We become profit, profit, profit. How much money can we make? How much money can we make? Of course we want to make money. We all have bills to pay. Verizon wants their phone paid for every month. It drives me nuts, right? Charges just keep going up. But at the same time is we're not profit driven, meaning we don't look at something, that's important, that's foundational, that's mission focused. Oh, we can't do it because we're only going to make 15 points. So I think that's really important as you are building out your network, go direct, smaller companies, is to stay mission focused, even when it's hard, even when it's difficult, even when you're suffering, right? Stay mission focused, because I truly believe that's something that's going away. We're losing that authenticity. We're losing that human connection. And that's why you mentioned that there's a disassociation between product and downstream originators, is because it's us, the manufacturers. We're so focused on just sell, 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 grow, 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 profit, profit, profit. Well, yes, that's part of life, but we're mission driven focused. I care more about the people, the farmers, our supply chain, building the right products, taking our time, doing the right things is super important.
Yeah, I mean, I think I always have this at the end of all the pieces that I write. I have my little thing before I say I sign off is build with love, and I think that's kind of, it's something I really truly believe in, which is you have to truly care, and you actually have to have some love if you want to change, if you want to like wake up and actually be a participant in actually moving society forward in a good direction. And I think actually it's interesting, next week the conversation we're releasing next week is around this whole idea of the of our social structure breaking down in the United States, and has nothing to do with like business per se, but it was an essay that I read, and it hit at the core of what going direct and everything you just said, Scott, was about, which is if we want to start rebuilding our social structure, it starts with, a bunch of people with a similar mindset to you, who's saying, hey, I see a problem and I see something that's worth, kind of dedicating my life to for a period of time, and being willing to not veer from your values if you want to actually make a change. So I appreciate that. All right, you ready for a little rapid fire, and then we'll wrap up?
Yeah, let's go.
All right. What's the biggest lie the industrial oil industry tells its customers?
Petroleum is better than anything that's out there.
If you could force every buyer to understand one thing about lubricants, what would it be?
They're critical to customer satisfaction.
What does cheap actually end up costing an operator over time?
It could ruin an investment that costs thousands, hundreds of thousands, or millions. When a lubricant fails, it's precipitous. And so that means that equipment could stop, that equipment could break, or that could have catastrophic failure. So if you skimp on lubricants, you're guaranteeing that your equipment will not have the highest efficiency and the longest life. So you're devaluing your ROI.
What's the most common objection you hear when pitching your lubricants?
Price.
Why is it wrong?
Because they're looking at initial buy-in versus total value, total cost of maintenance.
Great. All right, my man, I appreciate you. Have a good rest of the day, and look forward to checking back in the next few months, because I know you have some exciting things planned, and especially around the content side, which we didn't even really talk about, but maybe we'll do a follow-up to talk about the content strategy. So
cool. All right. I appreciate it, Jordan. Thank you.
Thanks, man.
All right. Take care.
Hey, my friends, Jordan here. First and foremost, a sincere thank you and appreciation for all of our early listeners, readers, and supporters at Going Direct. It's really what keeps me going to do this each and every week, because there's clearly a community of folks out there looking to build a going direct economy, which gets me super excited. Secondly, if you haven't subscribed, please do so. Our main channel and community is forming over on Substack. The link is in the show notes below. And we'll also be putting out our weekly conversations at YouTube, Spotify, and Apple Podcasts. I hope you all have a great day, and remember to go direct.